This is part 2. I'm a little annoyed, not at you guys, like at myself. This is like my 4th time starting this video. Like, you know, I got everything organized and I sit down to record and then like life happens and I'm like, okay. So I'm like repeating myself. For you, this is the first time you're hearing this, but for me, this is like the 4th time. Okay, so 4th time's a charm. We're gonna do it this time. Okay, so this is part 2 of Sexuality, Sex, and Gender. Hopefully you have already watched part 1, and I'll just do a quick recap of what I said in the previous video, is that I set up the syllabus to be that we would cover this for 3 days, assuming there would be parts 1, 2, and 3, because like I mentioned before in the previous video, that in class we spent a lot of time talking about this 3, if not 4 days. Obviously, with our not being that like class discussion and interaction, it might not be as long, but also you guys know I love to like ramble, so it might be as long. So in the syllabus I have, 3 days set aside for this. I'm assuming there will be parts 1, 2, and 3. However, depending on how long we take to do this video, it might just be parts 1 and 2. And then you would just have a 3rd day to like, catch up on other classwork, work on the paper for this book, whatever. So not starting this video over. Okay. Well, I was just going to jump in to say I'm feeling so much better. Oh, I am feeling a lot better. Oh my God, I'm not starting this video over again. I am feeling a lot better. Like I mentioned in the previous video, I was convinced I had COVID. I got tested, it was negative. I had all the symptoms. I know there's a possibility of getting a false negative, but so like I was just careful anyway with, I wasn't hanging out in large groups. I basically was home. I know my mom was in town last week, but she was here. We were here. I was gonna make another point about that. Oh yeah, but I'm feeling much better now, so that's good. I'm sure I'll be sick with something else. Next month. This is what it's like to get older, you guys. Your health. But anyway, feeling much better. So as you can tell, like I actually have makeup on. Not that I wear makeup all the time, but I like to put a little on for the videos sometimes, and definitely, but when I'm sick it's not gonna happen. So you guys have seen me at like my worst with like no eyebrows and like a snotty nose, and at my best, maybe one of the first videos of the semester I'm like, I'm so excited about the new semester, and then sometimes I'm not sick and I still don't dress up for these videos, so that's that's just life. But okay. Okay, so we ended the last one, part 1, we ended that on slide 9, asking these kind of, questions, food for thought. Now in class we would have discussed them a little bit, but we didn't really obviously have that opportunity because it's, video. And hopefully, though, you did take a minute while you were watching the lecture or just in your own life that you took a moment to kind of think about these. So we were talking about those concepts I discussed about gender and sex, and just interesting, like I said, food for thought. So we're just going to move on from there. So slide 10, human sexuality. So there are 4 terms here. 3 of them should not be new to you. 1 of them may or may not be, depending. So we have heterosexuality, homosexuality, bisexuality, and pansexuality. So heterosexuality, this is when you are attracted to the opposite sex. So if you are a female, you are attracted to males. If for homosexuality, this is being attracted to the same sex. Did I say that right? Attracted to the same sex, okay. If you are a female, you are attracted to other females. The 3rd one, bisexual, so whether you are a male or a female, you are attracted to both males and females. And then we have a new term, pansexual. So I would say I probably heard this term for the first time maybe like 5 or 6 years ago. Like, I'm sure it existed before then, but I had only heard it in my own personal life about then. I would say, however, I'm hearing it a lot more being used in the last like year or 2 maybe, which is interesting. So like I said, I'm assuming the majority of you have heard this term, but I know when I taught this class last year that there was probably like half the class, maybe a little less than half, hadn't heard of this term. It was completely new to them, and they were all young. Like, typically when I teach a class of like 35, 30 of them are under 20. So, it surprised me. But anyway, so it's interesting. So you, as you're watching this video, might be thinking, oh yeah, I've heard that term. I totally know that term. And some of you might be thinking, oh, I've never heard that term. So interesting. So we'll talk about this just very briefly. So like I said, heterosexuality, homosexuality, bisexuality should not be new terms. I'm assuming you're all good with those. And pansexuality is just a little bit different. So for the other three, it's talking very exclusively about the sex of the individual and then which sex they are attracted to, which is obviously how we've always understood it. Pansexuality kind of brings in other factors into this equation of understanding like sexual orientation. Some would say this is good, some would say this is, it clouds the issue too much. So this is interesting, like obviously I can't ask you to respond, but like think about in your own mind, what's your opinion on that? When we are understanding sexual orientation, should it be just based on those, like we've always kind of understood it, whether you're male or female and who you're attracted to, male or female, it's a perfectly valid, fine way of understanding human sexuality. But when we talk about pansexuality, we're kind of pulling in other factors aside from just your sex and the sex of the person you're attracted to. So many would argue by having this new term, it kind of brings in, it kind of recognizes that human sexuality is more complex than just, the sex of the individual. And many would agree with that for sure. And others would say, well, sure, but we don't have to have a new term to kind of understand that concept. That, of course, people understand whether you're homosexual or heterosexual or bisexual, that there's more to the person you're attracted to than just, obviously, what sex they are. But that's kind of the baseline, right? If you're homosexual, you're only going to be attracted to people of the same sex. That's the baseline orientation. So like I've seen a lot of discussion back and forth about this, like how should we be using all these new terms? Should we not? Does it cloud the issue, or does it recognize the complexity of human sexuality? Some would say yes, some would say no, in either direction. Like I said, if we were in classes, this would be a great point for us to kind of talk about. We're not, So just kind of understand that that's kind of, I think, where we're at academically, and then socially too. Like I said, some of you may have heard this term, maybe even used this term for yourself, and others may have never even heard of this term. So it's interesting to see how this conversation will go in the next 5 or 10 years, whether a lot more people will be using this term, or whether maybe no one's really using it at all anymore. So that's just the way of culture. So we'll see how it goes. Okay, slide 11. So kind of looking at not just bisexuality, but it's kind of an interesting point about bisexuality in this scale that and most of you probably, this is not new to you, that for many people who would say that they are bisexual, whether they are male or female, and if they are attracted to males and females, it's typically not like a 50-50%. It's not 50% male, 50% female that they're attracted to. Typically, they are attracted to one sex over the other. And this is kind of getting at this. So if you're not familiar with any of this research, if you've taken like an intro to sociology course or an intro to like even maybe psychology, depending on where you took it, you might have been introduced to this. So human sexuality, there was a time, no surprise, when people had a lot of misconceptions about, like reproduction. We kind of talked about that before. But human sexuality in general, within our own culture, cross-culturally, and some scientists were like maybe, right? Maybe we should just do some research and find out like what things have been assumed to be incorrect, what's actually going on. Let's understand humanity in terms of sexuality. Let's get some actual information. Let's get some data. Let's see what's happening. And so here's the scale looking at, this baseline orientation, whether you are from 0 to 6, whether you are a 0, which is exclusively heterosexual. So if you're a male, you are only attracted to females 100% of the time, all the way to 6, which is exclusively homosexual. So like if you're a male, you are attracted to only males. If you're a female, you're attracted to only females. And obviously we know plenty of people would, like if I, like in class, I usually ask, like for those who feel comfortable participating, raise your hand if you're a 0, raise your hand if you're a 4, raise your hand, and for the most part, the class participates. But now you don't, like if you're watching this lecture right now, you don't have to worry about anyone like looking at you. Just like think to yourself, like, where am I on that scale, And obviously you, because I've got, quite a few of you, some of you might say 0, like for sure, heterosexual, no question, that's my orientation, I'm heterosexual. Some might say 6, homosexual, absolutely. And then many of you might say, well, I might be a 1. And so if you're looking at the key for this, you'll see, and I know in the past when I've done this in class, I see a handful of 0s and a handful of 6s for sure. And I see a couple of 3s, but I see a lot of like 1s and a handful of like 5s. I see people who are like, let's take 1 for example, that's mostly heterosexual but sometimes attracted to members of the same sex. I see a lot of women, and this shouldn't be any surprise to you, that females, given our particular culture, so getting at these, like, even if we're talking about something biological like sex, obviously we know, and this is the point of this whole PowerPoint, is that sexuality is going to be absolutely influenced in so many complex ways, layers and layers of ways, by our cultural and social experience. So shouldn't be any surprise to you that women, like adult females in our society, feel a little more open about expressing whether they might be attracted to someone of the same sex, and males tend to not feel as comfortable. Let's hope that changes. Over time, we're starting to progress in the right direction, that people should be free to express their sexuality in whether you are a male or a female. But we still obviously see that. So it's no surprise that, like, at least anecdotally, that when I've asked my students, that I see a lot of women saying, I'm a one, I'm pretty much heterosexual, but I can admit that I'm attracted to other women occasionally. Now, whether that attraction is something they've acted on or not, like, that's not the point of this. You could be, you could be a one or a two and be like, I'm absolutely attracted to someone of the same sex, but I've just never really, dated them, or I've never had the opportunity, or maybe based on their own personal circumstance or society, they didn't feel comfortable doing that. But so this is thinking about in terms of, like, in your own mind, who you're attracted to. So like I said, take a minute, think about where you kind of fall on that scale. I probably would get a mixture of answers from you if we were in class, like I said before. I remember when I taught this class like last year. I've talked about this scale for years, because I've been teaching this class for years. But I remember one time, I had a student, we were going through, it was like, who's a 5, who's a 6, and I had a woman, was like, I'm a 6. She's like, men are gross. And I was like, that's your opinion on that, it was just, this is what I miss, like, the interesting perspectives of students, the commentary, we don't get to have, this way. So, okay. But also I would say, like, when I'm like, who's a 0? I see a bunch of men. Nope, exclusively heterosexual right here. So it's interesting for me, like, as a scientist, as, as the instructor, to see, like, the attitudes of, like, I'm almost like, looking, it's like an own little, like, data collection in my mind of, like, oh, I see men tend to react this way, women tend to react this way. Interesting, and none of that should be a surprise to you, based on, like I said, the cultural experience that most of us have, in our society, of what's deemed to be, acceptable, appropriate, whether you are a male or a female, certain things are not. And we're going to get into this, and this is, actually, you guys kind of touched on this in the the discussion, and that was the other thing. So I read over the discussion prompt. You guys had some great commentary back and forth, and I'm going to be pulling some of that into this when I deem it to be, like, pertinent to whichever slide I'm on. But a lot of you were kind of talking, I saw some mention of, like, heterosexuality, homosexuality, and how, a lot of this is kind of just complex. Okay, I could just be rambling about the Kinsey scale this whole time. Let's go to slide 12. Okay, so some more interesting questions to consider. Like I said, I've said this multiple times. When I have these questions on here, it's because, like, in class we would be able to have them, and I have altered them. Like, in class I had a lot more, but I still keep them on the PowerPoint, even though we can't have, like, this group discussion, that you can still kind of think about them, I can still kind of talk about them, and we get ourselves thinking about these ideas more and more. Okay, so the first one. So this is an interesting concept, and I would say when I ask my students this question, I get about 50-50 on this. People really seem split on this, and for, like, really great reasons either way. So it's an interesting point. So this is the question, do you think that gay rights activism and trans activism belong in the same social movement? So LGB versus LGBT. So, like, I'm much older than you guys. I know I've said that many times. When I was younger, it was LGB, because it was about, these 3 sexual orientations, whether you're lesbian, gay, or bisexual, and understanding that those specific individuals clearly have very specific concerns regarding, like, society and legality, and so, like, that's not a surprise. But then, of course, as time went on, there is now, like now we say LGBTQA plus, if I'm saying that correctly. So it's been expanding, and some would say, great, it should be inclusive of more. And some would say, well, yeah, like I'm not sure about that. And this is the point of this question. The question is obviously not whether these other groups clearly have their own concerns, obviously, but should the concerns of these groups be kind of combined is the question. And I've had students say like yes and no to this question. Students would say that clearly both have a need for activism for their own specific reasons, but by combining them, it actually seems to lessen the impact because a lot of the information gets confused. Because one is talking about gender identity and one is talking about sexual orientation, which obviously you guys know are two very separate things. And so by including them all under the same kind of activism, does it cloud the issue in terms of like what people might be asking for, how other people on the outside might get confused about it, which obviously can happen. So, and this is the point that a lot of people say we should obviously they should have should be separate, and some would say no. Like I said, other side of this would be people saying no, they should be included in the same thing because of XYZ. And so like, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that by including, like now I said it's LGBTQA plus, that it's too many things under the same umbrella, which can often be a detriment to those individual groups? Like probably arguments would say yes, some would say no. So it's an interesting point. Or do you, like I said, and if you don't think that they should be, do you think that they should be separate? There should be a group that is, more focused on sexual orientation and the concerns, the very specific concerns that would entail, and then versus trans activism, which also has its own very specific concerns. Like, do you see that it would, be beneficial to both parties to kind of have a separate form, a separate movement? Would that actually end up benefiting either group? So like I said, an interesting kind of thought to consider. I really miss having these class discussions because we'd be probably having some really enlightened conversation about it. But anyway, something to think about. Okay, and so then this other thing, and I had a student ask this a couple years ago, and I'm like, I'm going to include, that's a really good question. Because and actually some of the other students were like, I thought that too. Like, I'm not sure, it's confusing. With the use of the new term pansexual, does this eliminate the need for the term bisexual? And when I've asked this question in like subsequent courses, the students have said, no, they're two very separate things. But I do have sometimes I'll have one or two students say, well, maybe they're kind of the same thing. Like, what do you think about that? Are they the same thing? Are they not? Like, based on the definitions I've given you, they're different. But many would say, well, like now you're like splitting hairs. They're kind of basically the same thing. But like, I would say that they're very different. So what do you think about that? Like, think about that, in your mind right now. Do you think that they are very distinct? Do you think they're similar enough that we can just use one over the other? What do you think about that? Okay. And then this last question. So this might be a little more heavier than probably the other things, but this is a really interesting point. And I would say, ever since I started teaching this class, I've had students bring this idea up in some form. So it's just interesting. And like I said, it's all about, this is what we're about in science and academia is kind of pondering these questions and thinking about the pros, the cons, which side, this side, and having these really interesting, discussions and dialogue about it. So do you think any sexual orientation is exclusionary? So I hear this term being thrown around a lot. Sometimes I feel like it's like appropriately, and sometimes like it's overused, And I mean, this is true for like anything in life, sometimes. But I've heard this used about like different orientations, sexual orientations, that they're exclusionary because, like, for example, if you are a heterosexual and you're like, I'm a male, I'm only attracted to females, so that's somehow exclusionary. And this is the point. And I would say the majority of my students would agree with what I'm about to say, and so it'd be interesting to see what you guys think about this too. That no, like, your orientation is your orientation. You can't change it. if you're a heterosexual male, you're only going to be attracted to females. Like, that's just something innate in you that you can't do anything about that. It's not exclusionary because that implies that there is, like a motive behind your decision, or that you're doing it on purpose. And of course, like we know, it's 2020, like we all know, sexual orientation is not something that you can change. And in the past, we know that many people have tried with like things like conversion therapy, and we can have a whole conversation about that. Trying to get people to change their orientation, thinking that they can, send them to some kind of like camp to get them, or therapist to get them to change their orientation. We just know that's just not how it works. Sexual orientation, it's you can't change it. But I've heard this though, that, well, if you're a lesbian, or if you're whatever, that's exclusionary. And like I said, most of my students, when I kind of brought up this question, when other students have kind of asked it in different ways, like most would say, no, of course not. You can't like change your sexual orientation. But like, what do you guys think about that? Do you think, like, maybe it's like a generational thing? Maybe you would say, well, that's a lot more fluid now, blah, blah, blah. Like, actually, let's make this an extra credit then. This is a really good one for extra credit. So for that last question, are sexual orientations exclusionary? I'm assuming I know what most of you are going to say. You could still go ahead and say it. And I might have someone who maybe says something else. And like I said, it's always fine to have a differing opinion. Okay, so we'll make this extra credit. I'll say, give me, 5 sentences. Give me like a short paragraph, just so I understand what you're saying, answering that question. And we'll make it 5 points. 5 points. 5, I'm gonna write this down so I don't forget. 5 points. Okay. So I've done this on previous videos where I'm like talking, and then I'll be like, that's a good point for extra credit, and I'll say, okay, and I'll get a few people, sending me the extra credit. I'm like, okay, good, you guys are watching the lectures, or at least a few of you are. So this one's not too far into the lecture. It's like 20 minutes into the lecture. I posted them, or I've done them sometimes at the end of the lecture. I'm like, who watched this lecture to the very end? A few of you, Anyway, okay, so I'll make that one. That's a good one. So like I said, 5 points. Give me like 5 sentences. Just your opinions. Just give me your opinions on that. Okay, so moving on to slide 13. There's just some pictures on this one. So we're going to be talking about cultural views on sexuality. So this is what the discussion prompt was mostly on, looking at. It asked about things like double standards for males and females in terms of their sexuality, how we understand virginity, whether there is like a taboo against talking about, like, why do we view sex as a negative? And like I said, a lot of you guys had some really great discussions back and forth about this. So it was really, seems like you guys, no surprise, we're obviously a little more interested in this topic than some of the other topics we've talked about. Sorry guys, I have to like blow my nose off screen. Okay. Hopefully that was off screen. You guys didn't see me like picking my nose. Okay. So we're going to talk about some Western cultural views on sexuality. Okay, so let's go to slide 14. So here we have birth control. Oh, so in class, I would ask you so many great questions about this, and we would have this great discussion, but I'll still ask them. Okay, so like, typically the one I ask is, when you, whether you're a male or a female, when you go to the store and you're purchasing, let's say condoms as an example, do you feel embarrassed? Do you feel judged by, let's say, the person ringing you up? Like now we have like self-checkout. Can you buy condoms in self-checkout? Yeah. You can, right? I will do a scientific experiment to find out. Oh my God. Well, because I know you can't purchase, most places you can't purchase liquor, right? I don't even think about this because I want to say, now I'm originally from California. I want to say in California, this might be different, but I don't know, when I was younger, you had to be 18 to buy condoms. So if you were like 17 trying to be responsible, you know, But I don't think Nevada has, I would imagine Nevada doesn't have that law. Okay, I just spent like a minute talking about that. Okay, so back to the original question. Whether you are a male or female, when you say you're going to purchase condoms at the store, do you feel embarrassed? Do you feel the need to hide it? Do you feel that you're being judged by the person checking you out? Obviously, if you're doing self-checkout, it's not a problem. But if someone's ringing you up and they're like, scanning, do you feel like it's like completely neutral, like no one cares? Or do you feel like they care? Do you care? Like, what's your kind of opinion on that? So think of it. I'm sure as I'm asking this question right now, you're already thinking like, oh, there was that one time when yeah, I've done that, and like no big deal. Now, not 100%, but typically what I see with my students is there's mostly a split with the male and the female experience, which probably is not a surprise to you, right? Typically the males will say that they feel like not judged at all. It's not a big deal. In fact, they almost feel kind of proud that anyone ringing them up, especially if it's another man, that it's like a positive experience. And the women, I've heard this from quite a few female students saying that when they've if someone's ringing them up, if it's another woman, they feel way more judged. And I was like, that's interesting. And no surprise, like in our cultural experience, women tend to judge other women more harshly for a multitude of reasons. But so like think about your personal experience with that. It's interesting though, because if you are thinking I'm going to be sexually active, or I anticipate that I might be very soon, I'm going to be responsible in my society, responsible to myself and my partner, to our health, that I'm going to go purchase this product, doing the right thing, but we still see it as a negative. And this is what I was getting at with that question before, why do we see sex as a negative? Now this is only one aspect of it, but why, when you feel like you're doing the right thing, do you feel like you're being judged? So it's interesting, like you shouldn't be, obviously, you shouldn't feel judged at all. You should feel proud of the decision you're making. And I would say like, we see this attitude changing like generation to generation. It's, and especially in like a city like Las Vegas, it's probably not a big deal. I mean, you have condoms everywhere. And I will also say as you get older, you tend to be like in general about life, you're just like, I don't fucking care. Who cares? Maybe when you're 19 and you're buying condoms, it's a little more like, I'm not sure, I don't want anyone to see me or whatever. But when you're like, my age, it's like, hey, where are the condoms? It's like whatever. That might not be every adult's experience, but I would say in general that's probably true for a lot of things. As you get older, you just caring more. But like I said, for the most part with my students, there was a split with the male and the female experience. Not always. Sometimes the females would say, oh, I didn't care, and sometimes the males would say, well, I felt a little embarrassed. But I would say it's, for the most part, there was this split with how the males felt and how the females felt about the whole experience. So it's interesting. Okay, so continuing this discussion about birth control, what about male and female access to it? So we're talking about condoms. Obviously, males and females can both go to, whatever, CVS, Target, and purchase condoms. So the access is essentially the same. But as a side note, this is interesting. Most of you, I'm assuming, maybe not, are probably unfamiliar with the fact that there's a product that's a female condom. I said this to my students last semester or last year, and they were like, what? Like, what's the difference? Like, there's a decent difference. So I should have put a picture. I forgot. But Google it, and you'll see that, like, it's similar product, but different. And you can almost never find them. And so I'll be open with you. I've used, like, the standard condom, but I've used a female condom before, too. And, like, the experience is different. And you might be someone who prefers the other one, and they are so hard to find. This was years ago, but I couldn't find them in stores. I was like, like CVS, Walgreens. I'm like, where the hell are these things? And I called Planned Parenthood, and because they, they'll give out in case you're wondering, typically they give out like bags of condoms, obviously, like, so if you're like, I don't know where to get any, go there. But I said, do you guys have female condoms that you give out for free? And they said, well, we do have female condoms, but we don't give them out for free. You have to pay for them. I was like, that's fine. Like, I'm trying to pay for them all day. Like, And so I went down there. I think I paid like $1 per, so I got a couple, not a big deal. But it was just like, wow, like, why are these so hard to find? And like, there are probably many answers to that question. Most people are probably more unaware of them, so they're not gonna, like, in terms of like, what's the word I'm looking for? Supply and demand. But then that's the other question, like, why are people so unfamiliar with them? They're not more difficult to use. They don't feel, I mean, it depends on the person, obviously, because some people hate condoms at all, but the experience, like the sexual experience isn't going to be better or worse depending on which type you're using for the most part. They're safe, that, like, so I'm not sure, like, and I have a feeling it's, and like, if you, like I said, if you Google this, how you use them, there is a slightly different process to how you use them. And I think this is why people feel less comfortable. So getting back to this idea, like we talked about kind of in the group discussion, about attitudes towards male and female sexuality. And I think also in terms of like attitudes towards female and male anatomy, that this might be the answer to this question. So it's interesting. So that was kind of a side note. Okay, so but what about other types of birth control? Like, what other types of birth control are there? I'll wait for you guys to answer. Obviously, like, you can go on the pill. There's things like IUD. Do they even have like the implant? You get the implant in your arm. I think they still have that. But those are all for females, right? The females are the ones who take the pill. They're the ones who have the IUD. It's typically, so when you talk about male access versus female access, it's almost like you can't even really have that discussion, because it doesn't matter if males have access to IUD. Like, they can't, doesn't matter. Male can't have an IUD inserted. It has to be the female who has the IUD inserted. And so, I mean, that puts a lot more pressure on the female, like in heterosexual relationships, right? Puts a lot more pressure on the female, because there are some females who can't take birth control. It causes too many problems. I feel like we have so many new types of the pill and so many different types to kind of address those issues a lot of women had in the past. But there are still some women who can't, they have too many, issues with them, which is completely legitimate. Like, you shouldn't have to take it if you have another medical issue, so they opt for, the IUD instead, and or another form, and so, but a lot of that is, like even the pill, that's the responsibility of the female every day to remember to take that pill, and so there's a lot of responsibility on the female if she's in a heterosexual relationship. If she doesn't want to get pregnant or get an STD, there's a lot more responsibility on her to access these products versus the male. But then at the same time, it's the female typically, as per your guys' group discussion, there's typically a lot more negative, we'll say burden, but that's not the word I'm thinking of, consequences for the female in terms of her sexuality, like socially and culturally. So it's just like, well, God, like, I got all the responsibility and I get the negative, backlash from it. So, like, that's great. But what about other types? So what about more permanent forms? So I have some listed right here, like permanent sterilization. So I think I shared this with you guys. I'm pretty sure, like, on the first day I talked about this, but I have a picture right here. So I was permanently sterilized in 2014. So I have known since I was younger I did not want to have children. I was on the pill for years, and I thought, I'm so tired of this. I'd rather just make it a permanent decision. And I talked to my gynecologist, and I said, what options do I have? And she said, well, we have something that we do, it's called Esure. And she's like, I want to refer you to one of our, surgeons who does that. And I was like, okay. And so I got referred to her, and she said, she was really great about it. She's like, it's like it's non-surgical, like there's no incision. They go in vaginally. It's like 12-minute procedure. We don't have to cut you open. And I was like, oh, in my mind, because I didn't know anything about it, I was like, they're gonna tie get my tubes tied. And I'm like, oh, this sounds crazy, but like, do I want to do this? I don't know if I want to go into surgery for this. But she was like, no, it's like really simple thing. And basically, you can see the picture. It's like that middle picture. Basically, what they do is they go in, like they numb you, because obviously it would still hurt. You get numbed. You get like a muscle relaxer, and you're awake the whole time. And so I got to see the camera, like I was laying, I was seeing the camera, like next to me, like what's going on? I could see like inside my uterus. And they just insert like these nickel coils into your fallopian tubes, and over time scar tissue will form around them. And it takes about 4 months. And then after that 4 months, you go in for like an x-ray to make sure everything looks good, But, and they do a test to make sure. But the procedure itself, she was like, you'll be in and out with, because there's like, they have to prep you and blah, blah, blah. And, you can't drive yourself home because you're like on all these muscle relaxers. But, like I was, was really in it. I was in and out. It was quick. And she said the most you'll experience is like, like imagine like a day of like bad period cramps, probably what you might feel that day. By the next day, you should be back to normal, totally fine. And so that's basically what it was, And I went a few months later for the check, and everything was good to go. And so yeah, like I said, that was quite a few years ago, and so like it's non-reversible. They can't like take them out, like it's there forever. And so before I got it done, I thought I'm 99.9% sure I want to do this, but I thought, what if there's that chance that I change my mind or regret it? And I haven't regretted it. And I even think now, like, what if I change my mind, like in 10 years that I wanted to be a parent? There's so many other options, and in fact, in the world we're living in, like I would say I would probably want to, adopt anyway. Like, but I still don't feel the need to do that now. I feel like it was absolutely the right decision for me. And I didn't have any difficulties getting that procedure done with my physician. I have heard, unfortunately, from quite a few friends who've had a very difficult time getting any kind of procedure like this done because they're told, you have to wait until you have kids. You have to wait until you are a certain age. And you have a woman who's, she's like, I was in my 30s. So my doctors were both like, look, you're in your 30s. You haven't had kids. You probably know at this point in your life whether you're going to have them or not. We trust your opinion. I had to wait 30 days from signing the paperwork to actually having the procedure just so I could like have time to think about it. But they said, that's all we require, and then you're good to go. But I've heard so many stories of other women having difficulties. Like, well, what if you get married one day and your husband wants kids? And it's like, these women are like, I'm supposed to make my medical decisions based on an imaginary person in the future. This makes no sense, And it's not even women who are like 18, which you're an adult. You should still be able to make those decisions. But I mean, I had a friend who was like 35, and she's like, can I just please get something done? They're like, no, you might change your mind. Like, why is that any of your fucking business, But anyway, so there are options to, for permanent sterilization. And then of course other women, maybe they've had 1 or 2 children. They're like, I'm going to get my tubes tied, because this is all that I want. Plenty of options. And for males, there's obviously like getting a vasectomy. Although technically, I think of it like a vasectomy is reversible, right? I'm pretty sure for the most part, at least, whereas the ones for females tend to not be. So you saw in the video, I kept like slipping down. Like, okay, I gotta sit up now. Okay, and then of course this last one here, the bullet point, abortion. Obviously, this is going to affect the female, not the male. But then, like getting into this question before about like access to them. Do you have access? Do you live in a state where you have access to abortion? Unfortunately, there are many women who don't. We could have a whole like lecture just on this topic, and it's unfortunate that we would even have to, that it's such a problem that we don't have access to this, as a standard medical procedure, So, like I think Nevada, especially like I would say Las Vegas, I think it's probably not as much of a problem, but maybe other parts of the state probably, and definitely other states for sure, So I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with this. But getting back to this idea of like these attitudes, whether you are male or female, like positive or negative attitudes about all of this. It's not the male getting the abortion, and you see like so many, and even some of you right now might be watching this thinking, I could never have an abortion for personal reasons or religious reasons. Absolutely, that's your right to have that opinion. That if you don't want to do it, obviously. But there are plenty of women who would say, I want that. Like that's the decision I would make between myself and my partner, or myself and my doctor, or just myself. That it's not anyone else's business. And so, like I said, we could have a whole course, we could have a whole lecture, we could have a whole class discussion on just that topic. And I have had this discussion in class with students, and it's usually like very lively and great debate, and so can't have that. But just think about that in terms of when we talk about male versus female sexuality, how a lot of these negative things, even if we're not even talking about the sex yet, we're just talking about like birth control procedures or access to certain types of preventative measures, that there's already a lot more responsibility put on the female. There's a lot more of a social burden put on the female before you even get to any of the actual discussion about the actual sex. So kind of leading up to this. Okay. So I was like, there might be a part 3. We're at like 40 minutes. I've done like 4 slides. There's probably gonna be a part 3. Because there's like so many slides to this PowerPoint. Oh my god, you guys. Okay. I knew I would ramble. I would just ramble. Okay, so slide 15. These are just some kind of more questions about, I won't get into this one too much, but thinking in terms of like sexuality and how we understand sexuality in marriage. And so, someone commented on this, I have some notes, on the, why do I keep blanking? Discussion prompt about how, I think a few people commented like this, about how, given the religion in their home or how their parents raised them, that they were taught, no sex before marriage, and that this is definitely still a thing, I think, culturally, that we have this idea that that's the best option. Now, many of you might be thinking, as I do, probably not the best idea. Probably every individual is different, and it might totally be for some people, and it might absolutely not be for some people, and I think that's fair, and some of you might think, no, it's a moral issue, and I think other people would say it's not a moral issue at all. Like I said, another great class discussion we can have. But anyway, but no surprise, when we think about this, we obviously all understand, regardless of your personal opinion or my personal opinion, we understand that culturally there's still a very specific attitude towards a lot of this, based on a lot of obviously like religious influences, that sex outside of marriage, whether like pre-marriage or if you're married and having like an extramarital affair, that all of this has a moral implication to it. And I think most of us would agree, for the most part, things like cheating on a partner is very different than having sex with a partner when you're not married. But sometimes they get lumped into the same thing. And a lot of this, when you think about it, a lot of these attitudes have to do with how we understand and view marriage, socially and culturally and religiously. So it's something else interesting to think about. Okay, so like I said, I don't want to spend too much time on that one, but kind of think about it. I want to get onto this next one. So slide 16. Is there a double standard? No surprise. Yes, there's a double standard, right? You guys talked about this at length in the prompts. I'll just go over a couple things. That stuck. Like, a lot of what you guys had to say was very similar, and there were a lot of really good comments. I'm not going to spend the whole time talking about everyone's comment because you guys read them, obviously, but I will point out a couple that kind of caught my eye. One was someone saying that her friend had said something that, like, women who want sex or women wanting sex is unnatural, and I was like, oh my god. Like, I feel like there were so many layers, like, to that. Like, well, one, on the surface level, like, of course we all know, like, if you're a woman, you're like, that's not true, we have a sex drive, like, that's, as mammals, in a sexually reproducing species, with an organ on our body that's meant just for sexual pleasure, obviously we know that that's not true. In fact, it's probably one of the most natural things about who we are as animals, is our sexual drive, whether you are a male or a female. So it's absolutely incorrect. That's absolutely like some cultural and social stuff being piled on to and a lot of people feel that way, But then the other kind of layer to it is, I remember thinking, I was like, well, wait a minute. If women wanting sex is unnatural and men are having sex with these women, to me it sounded like a horrible scenario of like not being consenting. Like, I don't know if I took that too far in my mind, but maybe some of you did too. Like, if you're not supposed to want it and you're not, but most women aren't staying celibate their whole lives, are they doing things they don't want to do? Whether it's, you guys understand what I'm saying? So I just was like, oh my god, I felt like that comment just had so many layers in my mind. Like, no, it is absolutely something that's natural. You should want it. You should enjoy it. If you're not, that's an issue, Now you can, oh man, I'm getting a call from my doctor. Ah, shit. Okay, I'm gonna take this because I don't want to have to call them back. Hello? Yes, it is. Oh, hi. Yeah. Well, I know they wanted me to call back, and the person I spoke with said that there was an issue because I wasn't feeling well. And so they said I might need to bring in like my negative test results. Do I still need to do that? Okay. And do you have to have me come in like so many days post like a fever or post not feeling well? How does that work? So I still have the sniffles. I mean, I'm not like 100% better, but I'm much better. I haven't had a fever since the 11th. Yeah. Okay. Right. Afternoon. Well, I'm gonna be out of town, um, on tomorrow and Thursday, but I'll be back Friday morning. If you have anything like Friday afternoon, would be fine. Ooh, you know what? Oh, no, because I have another doctor's appointment that day too. That won't work. Monday, I guess. Oh man, 10:45. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Bye. Okay, you guys, I'm so sorry. If I had like, fancy editing equipment, I would just have stopped the video, but I do not. I have tried. Um, I'm not gonna post like part 2.3, So sorry about that, but I had to take that because I've been trying to get a hold of them. Long story short, because I was sick, like you guys know about like my cancer treatment, I still have to go for like monthly injections. I still have like daily medication, and my monthly injection I couldn't go in because I couldn't go in sick because there's like chemo patients. Obviously, like I know what that's like to be a chemo patient. Like someone has a cold, you're like get the hell away from me because you can die. So obviously can't go in no matter whether I had COVID or not. I couldn't go in sick. So they're like, you have to call back, blah, blah, blah. But now it's throwing off my whole medication schedule. And so like they were kind of concerned and they're like, yeah, we're concerned about it, but you can't come in. And so then it's like phone tag anyway, okay. Now you guys know like my whole life, but okay. Okay, back to what are we at, 48 minutes? Oh. Okay, let's wrap, we'll finish up this and I guess we're going to do part 3. I was like, yeah, well, maybe only part 2. Okay. Oh my god, you guys. Okay, I was talking about something. Oh yeah, I finished that point. Okay, anyways, but so too, this idea of double standards. So some questions that I have on here. What are some of the negative words associated with male and female sexual behavior? So you guys talked about that in the discussion prompt, that a lot of times there are, positive words. So this kind of goes to the second question, positive and negative words. There were often more positive words associated with male sexuality and more negative words associated with female sexuality. Although not always, that tended to be the trend. So that's like no surprise. Are there incorrect assumptions about male or female sexuality? And so I think someone had commented, I don't think a lot of people, you guys addressed this one, but I think a couple people said, well, like this idea that women aren't supposed to want it or that men are supposed to want it all the time. Like obviously we know those things are, like every individual is a little different. You can absolutely be a female who wants it more than maybe her male partner, or vice versa. So that's more of like an individual thing. But obviously we know like across the board that in general, obviously if you're not taking maybe certain medication that hinders it or have a medical condition, that having a libido is very normal, whether you're a male or a female, so why do we tend to view sex in such a negative context? So this is part of the discussion prompt as well. And I got a lot of really good answers for you, about like it being more of a taboo topic, very puritanical society, like the list goes on and on. That absolutely, we know those things are true. Like I said, even with going to purchase condoms, we're like, oh my god. I was in Target the other day when my mom was here. I had to go pick up a prescription, and we were walking out of like that, like the pharmacy area, and we just because we were trying to avoid someone, social distancing, trying to avoid someone in this one aisle, kind of walked around the separate aisle to get out, and it happened to be the aisle with like condoms. So I wasn't looking, but my mom was like looking, and then of course like right next to them were like some vibrators, and she was like, oh my god, what is that? I was like, Mom, and I didn't know what she was looking at. I turned, I was like, oh, like I was a little surprised that there was actually a really interesting variety of them in Target. I was like, huh, okay. She's like, I can't believe they sell those here. And I was like, well, I mean, I was a little surprised only because I had never seen them before, but it's nothing to be ashamed of, Mom. Like, this is like the sex aisle, apparently, She's like, I know, I guess. I don't know. She couldn't really put words to like why she was surprised, but I think she just was. Like, she had never seen a vibrator before. But then I caught her like looking. Oh, I can't laugh, I'll start coughing. There were just, like I said, wide variety, like at my local Target. I was like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool. But I just, her reaction was just so funny to it, But like I said, times are clearly changing, but like people still have this negative view of like sex in general, even though everyone's freaking doing it. People are like, oh, can't talk about it, don't want to hear about it. It's wrong if you're a woman. It's wrong if you're not married. It's wrong. Like it's wrong. But it's interesting. Like, sex is something that feels good. It's enjoyable. Whether you're doing it with someone who you are in love with, you're doing it with someone who you only have known briefly. It should always be a positive experience for you. If it is not, clearly, obviously, that's a problem. And that's a whole other topic about, human sexuality, the negative parts of it with, rape or sexual assault. That's a whole other topic. But in terms of when it is consensual, it's something that you enjoy with your partner to varying degrees, So if that's the case, then why do we have such a negative view about it? So like I said, there's just so many layers to this, to the answers to that question, which is something to think about. And then of course that last question about how we view virginity. Oh, and then before I forget, I want to get onto these. Some of the other comments people had made about virginity. Someone said, that you're worth more, and this is especially true if you're a female. I'm like, oh, like I think a lot of you have commented to this degree that obviously those things are not tied. Your value as a person and whether you've had sex or not are not tied at all. They should not be, at least, And then, of course, like the double standards about the number of partners you've had, whether you are a male or a female, that if you have had a certain number as a female, it's like there's all these other names associated with you. But if you've had that certain number as a male, it's like, oh, yeah, it's positive, So, like, obviously, like, that's a problem that we have this sexist, double standard on that. And then someone else had pointed this out, and I had... this had come up. I talked about this when I taught this class last year, and someone else, one of you had commented this about some of the words that not just associated with male and female sexuality, that you call those people, but some of the words, the language that they use about the sexuality. And so someone had said, like, if a guy says, I'd hit that. And there was a few other examples. I was like, yes. And if you've watched, hopefully the majority of you did watch the documentary that I assigned, I'm blanking on the name of that documentary. The Mask You Live In. That they go into this negative ideas about males have towards women, and especially when it comes to sexuality, that the terminology really devalues women, and with terms like I'd hit that, and like, first of all, that you're using violence in a sexual connotation, and then that you're not even referring to the individual as human, but as an object. Like, no surprise, like, feminists have been talking about this for 100 years, that men have continued to objectify women in multiple, facets of society, especially when it comes to sexuality. And a few of you mentioned this too about porn culture, that's obviously a thing that we're seeing. And there's actually been some research on this, looking at, how so many, like, typically males, but not always, but typically males are viewing it at younger and younger ages, and they have these very skewed views about how sexual interactions are supposed to be, and it's all based on something that's not real, like at multiple levels. And so a few of you had commented on this, like I said, you guys had some really great comments and observations, so that was really great to see. Okay, so moving on to slide 17. Okay, so we're at 55 minutes, and I try never to go over an hour, but I do want to, because this last slide really goes with the rest of what I've been talking about, and this would be like the perfect point to stop. So we're going to finish up. This will be the last. Don't stop your video now. We still got a few more minutes, but just so you know, this is a good place to kind of wrap it up. But so slide 17. How do we perceive and categorize sexual experiences? So a lot of questions. If we were in class, I would ask you as a class, and then we'd all discuss it, but I'm still going to ask you now. What is sex? When I say the word sex, you, in your mind, have, you have a picture of something in your mind, or you imagine a very specific thing about sex. Everyone thinks about it for a second. I usually ask the class, okay, how many of you imagined heterosexuality? The majority of people would say, oh, I did. And how many of you would also imagined what we call PIV sex, or penis and vagina sex, or sexual intercourse? And most of them would say, that's what I imagined. So kind of think about that most of you as adults in the world, and especially as you get older, will have, a number of sexual experiences. And most of you understand and know that there are many things, not just 1, 2, 3, 4, 100 things you can do sexually, romantically with your partner. There's not just one thing or two things. There are so many things, and everyone enjoys different things. But we still have in our minds, like socially and culturally, that there's a standard of what you should be doing. And typically we imagine penetrative sex as being like, oh, that's the standard. And I even hear people say things like foreplay is the other stuff, and this is like the main event. And I was like, well, I mean, maybe for you, but other people, that might be the foreplay, and the main event is something else. And also, and this gets into this slide, like when you consider that like the normal type of sex or the standard type of sex, what does that mean for everyone else for whom that's not the case? So here, like on the PowerPoint, you can see like, what does that mean for homosexual sex? Especially if you're a lesbian, and you might still enjoy some type of penetration to some degree, but it's not clearly penis and vagina sex because there's no penis, right? But also, like, you might not enjoy penetration at all. So what does that say about your sexuality, that it's not considered like, and because I absolutely heard this from people, well, like lesbian sex isn't real sex. But like, who are you to decide that, And also, what does this say about, like I have here, what does it say about female sexuality in general? And this is kind of the point of this, what I want to make about this is, when we're talking about, evolution, reproduction, we're obviously talking about sexual intercourse when that topic does come up, because we're talking about procreation, and that has to be part of the process. But in terms of like human sexuality in the social or cultural context, and the personal experience that we have, we know that it's so much more complex than that. And there are so many other things to do. But what does that tell you as a young adult when you think, okay, this is the standard, this is whatever I'm assuming everyone else is doing, this is what I'm seeing in porn or whatever, but I don't really enjoy that thing. What does that do to you if that's not something you're into? Whether you're male, female, homosexual, heterosexual, like you could be absolutely be heterosexual and be like, I don't really, not like, sure, I like, intercourse, but it's not really my favorite thing. There's this other thing that I really like, or this other thing. Like, that's part of being human, So what does that do to us socially and culturally when it's ingrained in us, like, okay, here's the standard, and you don't fit that standard? What does that do to you? What does it do to you with certain groups, especially for women? So imagine that if this is the standard, normal, real sex is penis and vagina, or PIV sex. Let me sidestep it with this question. So if I asked you, like, what is the male sex organ? Like, right? As I burp, penis. And if I asked you, what's the female sex organ? I've asked this in class, and students, vagina, wrong. The female sex organ. And I usually get someone who's like, is it the clitoris? Yes, you don't have to be, someone just yelled penis a second ago, like why are we whispering clitoris? But this speaks to what I'm saying, that even some women aren't familiar with this idea, and especially many men, even heterosexual men, which is very surprising. Well, actually not surprising, are unfamiliar with the clitoris, like where it's located, what it looks like, its involvement in female sexual pleasure. But like going back to what I was saying before, like what does it do to you, especially as a woman, when the standard normal sex literally does not even involve your sex organ? What do you think that does? Like, women are like, well, okay, this thing that we're all supposed to be doing that, like, I get it, like, is kind of only peripherally addressing my actual sex organ during sex. Like, this doesn't make any sense, like, logically, right? And so many women, like, I'm not the first person to talk about this. You can read, a multitude of literature on this idea. But like for many of you, I don't think you've really thought about it this way. And if you have, great. But if not, really think about this idea that PIV sex is considered to be like the standard normal sex. And even in a heterosexual relationship, it still does not even address the female sex organ. So what do you think that does for women? I'll kind of give you an example of what it does. And this is just a very minor surface level example. You can probably take from this so many other like layers and layers of what it does to men and women, but especially women. As heterosexuals in our society, that how many times have you heard from a woman, and I know a lot of you were young, but this is not something that's going to probably change anytime soon, so you will probably you will hear this, and some of you probably have already heard this or have experienced this. How many women have you heard say, well, yeah, I had sex with him, like it was nice being close to him, but I didn't have an orgasm, but like that's okay. It was nice being close to him, and there's all these excuses that follow that up, and you might be thinking, hey, I've experienced that. I've heard that from my girlfriends. Like, think of it on the reverse. How many times have you heard men say that? Oh yeah, like we had sex. It was nice being close to her, but I didn't really feel that great. So like, maybe next time. I don't like how, like, I'm sure it must have happened, but how rare is that in comparison? This is because we have this standard that PIV sex is the standard, and for many men, it is the only thing. For many men and women, it is the only thing that we're really taught and we understand and know, because like many of you mentioned in the discussion prompt, that many of you didn't have that, sex talk with your parents, that you had to learn it from friends, or you had to learn about sex through, movies or through pornography. And then of course this is going to skew a lot of your sexual experiences as adults, whether you're a male or female, whether you were heterosexual or homosexual. So like I said, just kind of think about all of these ideas. I know I kind of threw a lot of like contemplative, things at you, and a lot of questions and a lot of stuff, but just think about all of this in terms of like the cultural and social experience, like I said, especially for women in this particular context, but obviously definitely for some men as well, where there's this standard of understanding sexual behavior, when most of us understand as adults in the world there are like a million things, everyone likes something different. But that's like, where do you think that leaves you? Like I said, especially with those last 2 points, where do you think that leaves you as a woman, when you're like, well, this real sex or normal sex doesn't even address my sex organ? How do you think that sense of being devalued in our society, or especially even in your personal relationships, like how do you think that makes women feel? And then also for men who are in homosexual relationships or in heterosexual relationships too, that's not even the thing they really like to do. Trust me, I know men who are like, yeah, like intercourse is fine, I like it, but I really like doing other things as well. Everyone has their own personal preference for that, And but like I said before, a few of you had mentioned this in the discussion prompt about porn culture, and this is so true. Oh man, we could have a whole discussion about that. That's probably not for this level intro level course. Probably for like a higher level course to really get into some of the like the critiques of that. But I'm sure you could probably go on Amazon right now and find a book about it if you're interested. But there's absolutely a lot of research into this, looking at human sexuality and how it is it has changed, especially for a lot of young men and for young women, like in multiple aspects because of the availability of pornography. And it's, you know, no surprise, a lot of it's very negative. So, I mean, I could feel like I want to talk more, but I keep seeing the thing. I'm like, I'm already at an hour and 5 minutes. That's pretty much it. I'll wrap it up now. I might, depending on if I think of more things to kind of reference, I might kind of pull in a little bit more of this into the part 3 before I kind of move on, because I feel like there's so much to kind of unpack in all this, and I feel I don't want to rush it. Oh, man. Okay. So we'll end it here. That's the end of part 2. And I will see. Probably most of you already turned off the lecture by now, but I wanted to say this at the beginning and I totally forgot. Don't forget, you guys have a paper due. So I'm recording this lecture on a certain day. You might not be watching it till another day, but your papers are due on the 25th. I've received quite a few questions from students who are clearly working on it. They want clarification on a few things. So I know some of you are definitely working on it. If you were like, oh, I totally forgot. There are 2 videos in modules that talk about the ethnography and the assignment. So watch those if you haven't. They're both fairly short. I think one's like 15 minutes, one's like 8 minutes or something. Okay. Sorry this one was long. You guys got a lot of details about my personal life. You heard my phone call and everything. But, okay. I'll see you guys on part 3.